Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me again. We're still talking about Ceuta in Spain. There's a lot of different ways to pronounce this. Apparently, people call it Ceuta, Ceuta, but someone gave me a good little remembering device. They say call it Ceuta, and I think that's the closest way to pronounce it, like a true Spaniard. But I'm sure someone's going to correct me, so that's fine too. But so we're going to be talking about that, and I did a live stream and I've written about this a couple days ago, but it just continues developing and the plot continues to thicken. So depending on who you listen to, there's all sorts of new supposed developments. Apparently, the Moroccan government may be behind this sudden mass migration, and we're talking, of course, about something like 50, 60,000 Moroccans basically invading. That word, I have an issue with the invading, or is it invading or inviting? And apparently there's some invitation going on, but we'll see. Anyway, 60 or so thousand Moroccans who barged into Ceuta, this Spanish enclave in North Africa, but has been part of Spain for centuries. And it looked like a mass invasion. I thought it was especially interesting because I have a historical point of view. And that Ceuta, that exact area, was where the launching point of the original Islamic invasion and subsequent conquest of Spain in 711 occurred from. So for me, it's a kind of a harbinger of things. But now we're hearing that the Moroccan government was inviting them or actually compelling these Moroccan migrants to go there. The Spanish government sometimes is implicated, is also inviting them. There's all sorts of videos, but this is why we're doing this live stream. We can get to the end, to the bottom of that. And of course, Israel is in the mix too. Apparently, Israel is somehow involved in this because, of course, Israel has to be. I'm being facetious. So what I've decided to do is bring our friend Ralph Schoellhammer, a Vienna-based analyst, political analyst, to discuss this topic. So without further ado, here is Ralph. Hi, Ralph. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, Raymond. Great to be back, and great hello to everybody. These are my favorite live streams, so it's fantastic to be back.
Yeah, you're very popular here. So thanks for making some time, because I know you've been in demand about this particular topic. So
not half as much as you, Raymond, but I appreciate the kind words.
Oh, stop. Okay. Anyway, anyway, so let's just start with the bare bone facts, if we can get to that. As you probably heard me saying, there's all these different kind of things coming out. I don't know what's true, what's not true, what's a lie, what's not a lie. So let's just start by, if you can kind of break it down and give us the essential facts of what has happened up to now.
Well, there are a few really interesting things. So number one is the official numbers are now out. There was a meeting of I know that sounds very boring, but I promise it gets exciting in a second, of the European Union's interior ministers. So now the official number is that it was 70,000 people. So originally it was like 48, then they said 60, and now it's 70,000. Then on Saturday, we have been told that every single person left, right? So apparently they came in, and just to a last point for clarification, Ceuta has, I think, I was about to say a peacetime population of 84,000 people. So just for your own imagination, imagine you are, a small city or a smallish city with 84,000 inhabitants, but that of course includes, the baby and the elderly. And then you have 70,000 people come in, and everyone who saw the video, let's be generous, at least 60,000 of those 70,000 were young, by definition, military-aged men. And of course, that makes a difference, right? I mean, these were not women and children. These were not the elderly that fled from catastrophe and made it across the border. These were young men, right? As I said, that probably with the very clear goal, then ultimately to go to mainland Europe and from there, right, make their path into the West.
And now, just to amplify your analogy, so people understand, America, I think, is something like, I don't know, 350 plus million. So the equivalent would be, imagine 350 million people in one night.
Yeah, I mean,
entering America from all around. That's what it would be like.
Yeah. But that's, I think, because everybody then downplayed it and said, well, this was an incident. I mean, what do you mean is an incident? If you do not define what happened there as an invasion, then what exactly is an invasion? And then the next story that we've been told on Saturday was everybody left. Now, I took a look, and now the Spanish Ministry of the Interior came out and said, well, at least, and that's going to, I think, carry a lot of weight here, but at least 2,000 people are still there. And most importantly, according to Spanish authorities, those are, and that's a quote, I'm sure it sounds better in Spanish, is that those are the worst of the worst. So those are people that have in the past been suspected of being part of Islamist groups, sympathizers. They have been rejected.
Those are the ones that remained, you're saying?
Exactly. Those are the ones that are still in Ceuta. So this is the other absurdity. And more importantly, and I think, Raymond, this makes so important what you are doing. On Sunday, video came out by individual bloggers, and then some of the so-called alternative media outlets jumped on it, of young men walking through the streets chanting Allahu Akbar. And as you said so eloquently, Raymond, I think in the Islamist imagination, Spanish territory in particular plays a significant role. So I would argue that walking on, and Ceuta, true, it's not on the European mainland, but it is Spanish territory. And I would say somebody walking on Spanish territory saying Allahu Akbar is a little bit like, I would say, a German walking through a Polish city and say, Heil Hitler. And everybody gets the message, because then the idea was, well, from the mainstream media, and this unfortunately has to be an attack on the mainstream media, said, well, we didn't report it because it is of no consequence. What do you mean it's of no consequence? Well, because this is something, this is something you just say in Muslim societies. But if you look at the video, that's just not what it looked like. It looked exactly how you would imagine, like somebody coming into a country and saying, from now on, it's us who's going to call the shots here. And the last point, the other argument was, don't worry. Okay, fine. They didn't all leave. We fibbed on that. Then they said, but don't worry, nobody's going to go over to the Spanish mainland. Now we know that at least 7,000, the lower number, some say 1,000, but the original number reported by the Spanish newspaper El Español was that 7,000 unaccompanied minors will now be brought to the Spanish mainland. And the Spanish minister, I think she's the Minister of Integration of the Interior, has said that the Spanish government has already earmarked 25 million for those unaccompanied, that's such a difficult word for me, unaccompanied youth.
Okay.
to take care of them. So that was yet another lie. And I'm convinced that there is more going to come out over the next couple of weeks, because and this is, to be very clear, this is me speculating. This is me conspiracy theorizing. But I find it completely implausible. Now, we have the official number, 70,000. That the story, as it is being told at the moment, is that 70,000 people came into Ceuta, spent 24 hours on the beach, and then left again, and nothing happened while they were there. I'm sorry, I'm not believing this. Like this is, if you would tell somebody the story, there is a village, with 84 people, and 70 young men come to this village, and they have nothing to do, and nothing happens, I would not believe it either. Because that is just not possible. And I'm sure that over the next couple of weeks, reports will come out about, stolen things, about violence, about looting. I'm absolutely convinced, because they got there without anything, right? So even if it's just for food and water, that they were just sitting 24 hours on the beach, and then they just left. I mean, I agree they did leave, but I think that lots of things have happened that we don't know yet.
All right, Ralph. A lot there to unpack. One of the first things I really want to really unpack, because you made a good point, and a lot of people might not understand it, this Allahu Akbar business and the long historical consciousness of Muslims, which is completely lacking amongst Western people. So basically, as I sort of in the introduction touched on, the invasion of Europe happened through this exact point, and Spain was conquered in the year 711 by Muslims. It's almost like deja vu, really. If you look at the sources, I cover them very, very closely in Sword and Scimitar. And if you look at the sources, they describe Muslims from North Africa, from Morocco, Berbers and Africans, on basically anything they could find that floats, and going from that little strip of Ceuta onto mainland Spain. And from there, the massive jihad began, and for massive carnage and destruction and enslavement that went on until all of Spain was essentially subjugated, except for the northwest quadrant where the Reconquista began. So Muslims are well aware of this. And they're also well aware of the fact that once an area has been opened to Islam, that's the Arabic word they use. They don't use conquered because that has a kind of negative connotation. They use the word fath, which means to open. So when they conquer a region, they've brought the light of Islam. They've opened it so Islam can come and fill it with its beauty and wonder. Um, so that's how Muslims see it. But once a place is conquered, it becomes permanent Islamic territory. So we often hear about Israel and the Palestinian conflict or the Arab-Israeli conflict. And I think a lot of people are aware that from a Muslim point of view, that's because that land was conquered in the 630s by Islam. And therefore, it can never be part of Israel or part of anything. It has to be, it's part of the Ummah. Well, the same logic actually applies to Spain. And a lot of Muslims are aware of that. And if you look like I have and look at what they say and, the internal conversation, Spain often comes up a lot. So to see young militant aged men in the thousands marching in that same area, chanting Allahu Akbar. Yes, this is, there's more to that than just some guys who want to come and have a good life in Europe. That's absolutely for sure. But okay, so what about this issue that, because I agree with you, they can't just show up 70,000 and then all of a sudden overnight. And I heard the same thing. They just pack up, they were just there vacationing on the beach and then they decided to go back home to Morocco. Was that the idea? But I've seen videos, and I don't know what's real or not anymore. I don't think anyone does, of apparently like the Moroccan government bringing them in trucks and unloading them. And others, I saw interviews saying that, the government actually encouraged us to go there. And yet others said even the Spanish guards were opening the gates. So I don't know, I don't know what to believe, but what do you make of all these other aspects?
Well, you're correct, right? There's video that shows that the Spanish guards were opening the gates. But as always, we don't know the details for this particular incident. So let's wait and see. Now, did the Moroccan government encourage it? Well, I think there is some evidence for this because they did it in the past. So every time, just for your viewers, right? There's a strong rivalry. One could probably even say a conflict between Algeria and Morocco, the whole Western Sahara issue. And interestingly, the government of Pedro Sanchez in Spain, for the last 3 years, they took a very warm approach to the Moroccan position. Autonomy for Western Sahara. They were even discussing maybe at some point Ceuta. I mean, you can't really say given back because it never really was part of Morocco proper, like the state. But to find some new arrangement. And as long as relationships between Morocco and Spain were good, these problems did not occur. But in 2019 and also in 2021 on a slightly lower level, right, there were some negative turns in the Spanish-Moroccan relationships. And every time when these things go sour, even for a moment, the Moroccan, let's say, approach to border security alters significantly. They use it as a bargaining chip. And what happened just a couple of weeks ago is that Pedro Sanchez, once again, he's the Spanish prime minister, changed course. He decided to be a little bit warmer towards Algeria. They were discussing new pipelines, new gas and oil pipelines that would exclude Morocco, which is because of something that Morocco doesn't like. And they were saying, well, maybe the Algerian position is the one we should support. So what does Morocco do? They say, okay, we now need to, which is, by the way, from a strategic perspective, the completely rational thing to do, that they say we need to show Spain that if you think you can ignore us, we can show you what we can do. So I think the idea that this was encouraged and facilitated by the Moroccan government, I think is absolutely plausible. What I think is not plausible is then the idea that, in fact, it was not done because it serves the geostrategic interest of Morocco, which I think it did. To say that actually the Moroccans are just, the cat's paw, or they are just the pawns or the marionettes on the strings of the Jews and the Americans. So that this was done because Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu don't like Pedro Sanchez, which is true. But it didn't take a phone call from Donald Trump or Benjamin Netanyahu to tell the Moroccans to do this, because it was in the Moroccans' own interest. And this brings me to another point, Raymond, I hope we have more time to talk about. There is this very often weird perception, which is completely absurd, that on the one hand, the West has become very weak and decadent, which I think there's some truth to that. But on the other hand, that with the exception of the West, everybody is, and I hope I'm using this term correctly, your younger viewers will forgive me, that with the exception of the West, everybody is an MP, like a non-player character, right? Again,
Yeah,
so
NPC.
Morocco,
Yeah,
an epic story. See, because you're so
yeah,
much younger than me, right?
yeah,
Is
yeah. Yeah,
is, is
right.
that right? That the Moroccans cannot make an autonomous decision. It must some Western government that told them what to do. No. I think the Moroccans knew very well what they were doing because they see this as part of their ongoing conflict over territory in the region and part of the conflict with Algeria. And by the way, just as an add-on, other countries do that too. Turkey does this all the time. Turkey uses its migrant population, its refugee population, or particularly in the past, as a bargaining chip against Europe. Right? This is the reason why Europe paid billions of dollars, of euros, and whatever other currency to Turkey, because Erdogan said, if you don't pay, we open the floodgates. So this is nothing new, right? The fact that the Europeans are being blackmailed by their quote-unquote neighbors in the Mediterranean, that is not something that, you don't need the American Jewish conspiracy to make this happen. This is something that they know very well. And who also knows this, of course, and this is something we cannot neglect, is that Pedro Sanchez created domestically with his huge amnesty bill or his huge, illegal legalization bill, he created a massive pull factor. He created a massive incentive structure. Let me tell you and the viewers a great story. I mean, actually, the story is horrible, but it's good to know, I guess. You have now.
I'm listening, by the way. I just have to grab something, but go.
Sure.
I'll be right.
We have human traffickers in the UK who are now telling people who wait for their asylum claims in the UK to be processed to stop waiting for the processing in the UK, but to be smuggled to Spain, because in Spain they don't have to apply for asylum, they can just apply for legal status. Now the Spanish government says, and here it gets so absurd it's almost funny, the Spanish government says, oh, this cannot happen because only people who have been at least in Spain illegally for over a year can apply. But here comes the kicker. How do you know how long somebody has been illegally in the country? So if this guy from Sudan who was in the UK goes to Spain and says, I've been here for the last 18 months, the Spanish government cannot prove that he wasn't, because he was supposedly there illegally, and the very definition of being illegally in the country is that the country doesn't know that you're there. And what happened was that originally they expected 500,000 applicants for this legalization process. Now it's up to 1.2 million. Now they still claim this is all Latin Americans. I don't believe it. But again, this is my personal conspiracy theory, because as I said, and this was done by the Telegraph. So no, if it would be some, outlet and some shady reporting, but the Telegraph is a fairly serious newspaper, and they apparently had an undercover journalist who communicated with one of those traffickers. So they published the WhatsApp chat, or they use Signal, I think, or Telegram. What exactly the guy says, stop waiting for your asylum claim in the UK, go to Spain, tell them you arrived in 2025, you will get legal status, and then you can move on to other places in Europe. And this is precisely what's happening. So this is a much bigger story, I think, that does have nothing to do with nefarious dealings by the US or Israel. That, yes, they don't like Sanchez. That is all true. But and there's this, okay, just to really round this all out. And I know there was also the thing by Thomas Massey which made me I found amusing, where he said the United States government approved $40 million in security and military aid to Morocco. Guys, 40 million. That's about a tenth of what the European Union gives to Morocco every year. Like in international cooperation, 40 million, I'm sad to say, is not that much.
Yeah.
So, as I said, they don't like Sanchez. I'm sure that there was a lot of glee in the Trump administration. I'm sure there was a lot of glee in the Netanyahu administration. But they did not have to pick up the phone and tell them what to do. And just to be very clear, there is a tendency also on some parts of the European right and the American right that for me has too many sympathies with the Islamists, I'm very sorry to say.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's...
Sorry, it was a long rant, but...
No, that's good. The Islamist sympathy thing I find really bizarre, and it's I've talked about it before. It's this kind of idea that Islam, this religion, and Israel, a country that's 100 years old, or not even, 80-ish years old, that they're kind of like linked forever. And if the fortunes of one go up, then you have to hate the other one. And if you like the one, I don't get it. So because Israel is under criticism now, all these people feel like they have to support Islam, even though, before Israel was created, 80 years ago, Islam was the existential enemy of the West, of Christendom for centuries. So you don't need to, Israel doesn't need to be part of the equation to understand the threat that Islam poses. Anyway, one of the things that you said, which, it's really important to kind of elaborate on, we saw how the Moroccan government is using these migrants as a tool, to punish Spain or whatever. And you also pointed out correctly how Turkey does the same thing with migrants. And it's kind of when you really think about it, that's kind of so. So Europe and the European Union, these supposed allies and quasi allies around them, really blackmail them, and it's like a faucet. They can turn it on and off and just start sending migrants, which of course happened way back in around 2014 and afterwards. So what is Europe? Is Europe aware of that? And is there any kind of safeguards or response to that?
No, because there is this weird idea, and it is a weird idea because we talked about this before as well. Because there is this within the European establishment, and I know, and we can discuss this term then in greater detail. But there is this idea that it is always and forever deeply inhumane to send somebody back, which also makes the whole Ceuta story for me very odd, because this was the first case where apparently remigration was possible. So even if only 68,000 left, apparently it was possible. But when you look at the larger numbers, I mean, Iran has no problem sending people back to Afghanistan. Pakistan has no problem sending people back to Pakistan. Turkey has no problem sending people back to Syria. So this very idea, and this is of course what every human trafficker knows, this very idea that...
Wait, are you saying that Europe has some sort of... code that if someone makes it to their land, they just can't send them back?
Are you being facetious? I cannot. Your face never gives it away.
Sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not. But go ahead, answer anyway, as if I wasn't.
Yeah, this is a very, very odd system. I mean, we have, just to give you another example, and I'm sure that many of your German viewers know this. I mean, Germany is probably the only country where you have, where the Ministry of Social Services has a homepage in several languages where you then can apply for social services in Germany in your own language. So, because these are and absurdities stacked on absurdities stacked on absurdities.
How can we ever actually, honestly, between you and me, and everyone else, how can you ever blame migrants for doing what they do? If I was in Morocco or in Turkey or in Africa, of course I would do everything to get to Europe if I knew this. It's kind of like, oh, this is the promised land. Once I just reach it, I got everything I want. It's just, it's amazing. Is it just this kind of overwhelming sense of humanitarianism that Europeans have, or what? What's the deal?
I mean, it's an overused term, but the thing is, even if you use a term very often, it doesn't mean that it loses its validity just because you use it a lot. And I think that the very concept of the so-called tyranny of guilt, or the Schuldkult, as we said, and I think somebody mentioned it in the chat, I think is something that is a real thing, right? The idea that mass migration is the atonement for the true and imagined sins of the West during, in the past, is a real thing. And they know it. I mean, some people play this like a fiddle. I'm sure that you and your viewers know Mehdi Hassan, right? I mean, this is his entire shtick. Every time when somebody criticizes mass migration, he comes out with a tweet and says, well, then you shouldn't have, colonies in the past. Well, then you shouldn't have other. So this is,
Does he ever point out that, well, Islam shouldn't have conquered for 14 centuries, and, well, every land that Islam is on today is actually formerly not Muslim and was conquered and colonized?
Well, but that's the thing. You can talk about this, right? Because there's only one form of imperialism that's bad, and that's Western imperialism. Just as there is just one case of slavery that's bad, and that is slavery, used by the West. We never talk. I don't want to switch the topic, but it's part of the larger issue. I mean, the very term Slav, right, comes from that term. There was such a thing. I mean, we teach children in school this weird idea that throughout human history it was only white people who enslaved people of color, and it was never the other way around. Like, there never were white slaves. Again, we cut out certain parts of history, we overemphasize other parts of history, and we always do it in a way that we are the bad guys. By the way, no other civilization does that. No other culture does that, right? Nobody in China would write their history like this. Not even in Japan, right? One of the reasons why China and Japan still have somewhat troubled relations is because the Japanese still refuse, and I can they still refuse, to stop honoring their fallen soldiers and their revered generals of World War II. So the only civilization that is constantly trying to dig up dirt on their own and even imagine dirt on their own civilization is us. I mean, how do you write the Pulitzer? Well, first you start writing about how George Washington was actually a bad man, right? And how Thomas Jefferson actually had slaves, and how ultimately, the Declaration of Independence is nice, but socialism is better. I mean, you see this everywhere, and this is a very, very odd phenomenon, and I mean, we discussed this on multiple occasions, but this has real life consequences, because now all of us...
Yeah, this is exactly. It has immense consequences in many ways. This is the sort of intellectual underpinning of what we're talking about. The reason, as you were pointing out, that Europeans have this sort of, guilt, and even if they're illegal, we have to sort of look the other way because we owe it to them after what we've done to them, and we have it coming. That mentality is ultimately built on a skewed understanding of history, which is what you're saying, which is only Europeans, only Christians, only whites have done horrible things, from slavery to everything in between. And when you believe that, you're going to have, of course, a self-hatred for yourself. And this is why, as we're saying, only Western Europeans are the ones who actually despise their heritage and their forefathers in general, or at least are taught to. That's the prevalent sentiment in whether it's in public schools or in movies and Hollywood. And everyone else, you look at it, every culture, I don't care if it's African, Asian, South American, Aborigine, no matter what their ancestors did, no matter if they had any achievements or not, no matter if they were engaged in atrocities, they just venerate them. I think that's a natural human response. This is my continuity. This is my forebears. And then you come to the West, which actually has some pretty remarkable heritage, and everyone just condemns it and hates it and has to be ashamed of it. And this causes what we're talking about, which is, well, now I owe the non-Westerner, the non-whatever European, the non-Christian. And just to show you how bad this is, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but there's an African-American professor at Rutgers, and it's a woman. Her name is Bridget Cooper. And she literally, because she made a video and she's talking about slavery. And the way she talks is like the only people who ever enslaved anyone were whites. And she at one point even says, blacks and browns, they've landed on each other's shores without enslaving each other. It's only white people who do that. And because she believes that, she gets to a point where she says, yeah, we got to take these mother effers out, meaning the entire white race. And just imagine if, a white person said that about a black people, what would happen? She's, of course, still there. She's still teaching. But this is the sort of historical and intellectual rot that is ultimately, that no one really talks about, that's ultimately behind and empowering this kind of thing that we are talking about.
There is if also for your viewers, I'm sure you'll find it if you Google it. It was a very short video, I think, from a couple of years ago. It was on a podcast where I think a white guy and a Korean guy discuss all these matters, and the Korean guy says, well, one of the reasons why things are different is because Korea never had slavery, and the other guy said, that doesn't sound right. And then the Korean guy says, well, let me show you. And it's funny because the Korean guy then has to start laughing himself. He Googles it and then he starts reading, and I think it starts with that Korea has one of the longest uninterrupted histories of practiced slavery of all countries. But this is the thing. We not just distort our own history by what you just described, we also distort everybody else's history.
Yeah.
Because it's not, as you say, because if we say only we had slavery, then it's not just that we falsify our own history, we then of course also falsify somebody else's history. But I don't know if you have seen, because this fits so nicely. This was just a couple of days ago. I saw it on X, so it just passed. But I think it was quite an interesting incident. When Christopher Nolan, of Odysseus and Batman Begins fame, he was in China, and there was this Chinese student who interviewed him. And she asked him whether we live in an age that demands apology for greatness. And then Christopher Nolan says, do we have to apologize for greatness? And the answer is yes, we do. Or the audience rejects the greatness. So basically he's saying that if you make a movie in the West, right, you cannot make it unapologetically pro-Western, because everything that is supposedly great needs an apology. I mean, there is so much. I mean, take your books, Raymond. There is so much great stuff in there where you could make epic movies. I love the Lord of the Rings movies, right? So I love fantasy. I'm a huge fan, but there is so much, but there's so much stuff in history. There are Aragorn-esque figures in real history, but we have almost taught ourselves, I think, also to maybe being able of coping maybe with our own diminished status, and I include myself in that we say we can no longer accept that there have been significant figures in the past. I think, Charles Martel, I think, would be a great subject for a movie. I think the Battle of 732 in Tours and Poitiers, you could make a very epic movie out of it, including the politics and all. So this is Game of Thrones basically without the dragons, or like it's Lord of the Rings without
the only thing is if they'd made a Charles Martel movie, I mean, first he'd have to be a black woman probably, and then and he would have to spend a lot of time thinking about how maybe they have maybe the Muslims have a grievance, and he would kind of vacillate and not have, and then a woman would come and actually tell him what to do and help him get over it, and so maybe it's better
he would be a transsexual black woman with a peg leg. I mean, this is absolutely clear. I mean.
So maybe it's better they don't make that movie. Because that's just how it is. You have to make it and like people, that.
But this problem has permeated our culture so much that they even forego money on it. Because look at some of the movies that try to Top Gun Maverick, right? So or Lord of the Rings. These stories are great. It is nice to have sometimes have a story where you have great characters, where you have epic things going on, and of course where history did turn. I mean, this is another one of these elements, and again, you know this better than anybody else. When then you downplay the significance of these events, when you say, well, if the Franks would have lost, probably things wouldn't have been that much different. I don't know. I think they probably, or the siege of Vienna, right? They say, oh well, I mean, if Vienna would have fallen, they would have moved on further to the west. Would it really have made that big of a difference? Well, I think it probably would have made a lot of difference.
It is really a good point that you're making, which I think I've made myself. Which is, if you really look at the history of these Christian heroes and medieval heroes, you don't have to create anything. You don't have to engage in fictitious fantasizing, because it's all there. It's all in the primary sources. And you were talking about Aragorn-esque figures. Absolutely, they really were. We don't. I love Lord of the Rings. So I'm all for that. But it's amazing that the West's own heritage and tradition has actual real characters who were that, and yet the West is convinced that its heritage must, completely be denounced, because it's just everyone's an evil racist and a xenophobe and Islamophobe and the rest of it. And it's also true that this is why I think you get these small budget movie makers, and they make little movies, like Mel Gibson when he made The Passion, and I think he supported it himself, and it became one of the, I guess, one of the largest grossing movies of all time. And that's because that's what people want. But, you're making the point that they spend money, they're losing money to make these movies that nobody likes. And I think that's ultimately because, well, they just have so much money that they don't care. It's more important that they can mold, whoever they can reach, even though, a lot of people are rejecting it. But one final point, because we are going off on a tangent here. And, when I look this business of, and I really resent this, when I watch history, I'd like to be immersed in it. And so when if I'm watching a movie about Vikings, I want to see Vikings. If I'm watching a movie about ancient Egyptians, I want to see ancient Egyptians. But so when I watch these kind of medieval movies, and all of a sudden, like a third of the cast are black, this isn't because I don't have an issue with blacks. It's just you've completely compromised the historical, impact that this movie is going to have on me. I feel immediately as I watch this that immediately I realize, oh, I'm being conditioned and groomed for some political agenda, instead of, oh, these people want to show me a realistic movie. But But the point is, here's another. Now I'm going to go into a conspiracy theory. The reason I think they do this and put a lot of like blacks in white roles. So ostensibly, it's because they just they want to help blacks and they're so open minded and they want to give them a leg up. But I really think they're doing that to make whites and blacks hate each other. Because when a lot of whites see that and see their their characters and their history being constantly appropriated by blacks, well, they become resentful, and that's just a natural byproduct. So I wonder to what extent that these movie makers, they're not doing this because they're celebrating diversity. They're actually doing this because they want to feed the flames and make the different races actually resentful against each other.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, 100%. And whether it's done deliberately or whether it's a byproduct of their own delusions, I think for some it's the latter, for some it's the former. But you're right. I mean, you mentioned the Rutgers professor. I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, sometimes you hear it when people pick it up on podcasts or what came out of the schools during COVID, right, when they had the Zoom calls. I mean, what's happening in schools and universities, and they are no longer the institutions that educate the next generation, but they definitely want to socialize and indoctrinate the next generation. And this is a dangerous game. I mean, do you know Glenn Lowry?
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, he's I think I forgot which university he's at. I talked to him once, and he's African American himself, and he always had this line where he said, we tend to forget that, for example, in the US, whites are still a majority. And if you continue to do racial politics, at some point the white population is going to pick it up too. And the same is going to happen in Europe. So if you constantly define the world as everybody of whatever color against white, but you think, oh, don't worry, because the white people, to use the general term, will never start to organize around their whiteness. Again, it's not, to be very clear, it's not something I recommend, it's not something I wish for.
No, I know exactly what you're saying.
It is happening. If somebody just says to me all the time, you white people, at some point I'm going to say, you know what, it is true, I am a white man. I never identify. But if I become categorized as this all the time, then at some point I guess I will start to embrace that category. And you see this. This is what.
No. This is very important. Let me actually kind of put my 2 cents into this, because what you're saying which is what I see too. Which is okay. So the white race is always conditioned to, you have to accept everyone, and we're going to assimilate, and it's not about color, okay? And then everyone else treats it as it's about color, and it's about my race against your race, and then the same elements in the people who condition the white people to think that way, they don't ever chastise the non-whites when they fully embrace their own tribalism. And so you're right. If you're white and you're trying to get along, and okay, I'm down with this whole melting pot, let's all assimilate. But then everyone around you, black, brown, yellow, red, whatever, is constantly engaged in identity politics, and you white people, yeah, of course, it's inevitable that the white's gonna have to be like, okay, yeah, let me embrace it. I'm white, and let me and okay. So this is an important topic. So to what extent? Because this is what we just described is what's happening all the time.
Well, right? let me give you. I know we're doing, but I think this is an important issue. I'm glad we're doing this. We do a little bit of pop culture, but I mean, this is something that is present in everybody's life. If you look at this, is going to be a wild tangent, but I think it is a good.
Please.
It is a reasonable one.
My audience likes tangents.
Oh, well, I hope they do, because then I hope they enjoy this one. Look at the WNBA, right? Look at Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunnings. Right. If you would have a sports league where the majority would be white, and you would then have 2 black girls, and they would treat it like they are treated, everybody would immediately say this is racism. And by the way, I think it is racism. I would, if racism would be reversed or anything else, everybody would say that Sophie Cunningham and Caitlin Clark are victims of racism. But as you said, the idea is always that this is what I've been taught also at university, that there is no such thing as anti-white racism. Of course there is. And again, I don't want to foment racial tensions or anything.
Don't worry, you're not the one who's doing it. It's others.
Yeah,
we're responding to it.
No, because it bothers me, because I start, and this is like my own, soul stripping on your podcast, because I sometimes, and well, I hope 10 years when I start my political career,
this a
people
confession,
will find
Ralph?
people will find this and it will be over. But I sometimes, sense or have feelings that make me uncomfortable. I'll be completely honest about this, because I also started at some point to think in, that I've flashes of this idea. So maybe there is a racial issue there, and I didn't think like this 10 years ago, and it bothers me. But as you said yourself, this is really difficult, because when you open up a newspaper, it's white privilege, it's white this, it's the horrible West, and at some point I say it's as many your viewers also say, and you're far right and you're extreme right. I've just reached a point where I say, okay, fine, then I am. Move on. Okay, I start to you start to wear it as a badge of honor.
Yeah. I mean, that is the inevitable outcome of what. And then again, going back to what I said about the movie makers when they put blacks and whites roles, maybe that is the agenda. Maybe the people behind this ultimately want to make, like it's a racial war, and want to provoke whites to the point that they fall back on, that identity, because that's what they're making everyone else do in the context of, multiculturalism and diversity and et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, we need not go down that particular rabbit hole anymore. It's just interesting. And this is why I like talking with you, because on the one hand, we're discussing political events of geopolitical significance, but it's also important to understand that these are the underpinnings that explain the madness of the method, of why these things that are so irrational are happening. So to go back to Ceuta and these topics, what I was, and in the context of what we just discussed, what is Europe? Okay, so Europe is surrounded, and this is interesting, it's surrounded by Islam, actually. And the reason for that is because Christianity, which we think of as in Europe, was much larger, and Islam kept conquering the Christian West. And so the countries that you see, that's Morocco all the way to Egypt and North Africa, well, that was part of the Christian world, but it was conquered. So was the Middle East. So was Turkey. Okay, so you can see an encroachment. Even Russia up there in the far east, northeast, of the continent, you had the Mongols who became Muslim, the Tatar yoke, right? So if you think about Europe, if you look at all its neighbors, they're Muslim, because Islam was constantly encroaching and conquering and absorbing all these lands, and it hasn't stopped. So that's the issue. We're still seeing it, the Allah Akbaring in Morocco, from Morocco in the west to Turkey in the east. They're using it like a lever, migrants, and kind of like using it for pressure. So what is Europe going to, and Europe of all things is not prepared for this because of these sort of intellectual undermining that's going on, or philosophical even. So how can it stop this? How can it stop the inevitable? We've seen all these many polls that talk about the demographic change, and that's what's happening in many Western, especially European countries with Muslims. So if nothing changes, it seems like it's inevitable. 10, 20, 30, 40 years, that's basically the end of it. So is anyone in power and influence aware of this, and not just talking, but has some sort of safeguards or plans to try to reverse this?
Not yet, but I think there will be. Now, what I cannot tell you is whether it will be in time. I think that somebody that you know, and I'm sure many of your viewers know, I think Mark Stein always uses to say that we are basically one election cycle away from things being irreversible, but there is still one election cycle still there. I say even if the election cycle doesn't bring the outcome one would hope for, I'm afraid then things will just rearrange themselves by other means. There is no society on the planet, I believe at least, I think there is no society on the planet that ultimately allows itself to be taken over without any kind of resistance. But
the West is basically waiting until it's completely in such an underdog position. At this point, things can be done.
True.
But they're kind of waiting. The West is waiting until it's in a point where when it finally responds, it'll be too late, possibly. And that's what you're saying, I think.
It's partially so absurd. You see this now also in the United States, because this is not purely a European phenomenon. As we are talking right now, I think just a couple of hours ago, you had, what's his name? Abdul al-Sayed, right? The Senate candidate in Michigan, who I would say by every reading of his comments, I would qualify him as an Islamist. Maybe not a super radical one, but definitely not somebody who is embracing Western civilization or the tenets of Western civilization. I mean, you already have Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib in the U.S. Congress. You have the people that are being endorsed by Zoran Mamdani. You have Zoran Mamdani himself. So you have the things going on in Dearborn, Michigan. You have the things going on in parts of Ohio, right? So this problem of Islamization has different degrees, let's put it this way, in Europe, and it's worse in Western Europe, of course, than it is in Central and Eastern Europe. But even the United States are not immune to this, I would say. This is a debate that's happening in the US. And they are making inroads into the political system. I mean, if you have, and I think in New Jersey, there's a candidate, there are at least rumors that I forgot his name, I apologize for that he was an actual spokesperson for Al-Qaeda. Now these are, it's very odd that the very territory, New Jersey, New York, right, where 9/11 happened, I know it's long ago, that they're basically now handing the keys of the city over to people that are at least sympathizers with the ideology that was responsible for this. I mean, this is like telling the Japanese after Pearl Harbor that that they can get the governor. And if you listen to, for example, the things that are being said by, and I know the sons are not responsible for their fathers, but if you look at the things that are being said by somebody like Zoran Mamdani's father and his mother, I mean, these are anti-Western and thereby also anti-American activists. So what's going on? And I don't want to go in another tangent, but what's going on in Western cities? Because the countryside, in my opinion, or the smaller city areas, have long realized the very thing that you have been saying. I mean, this is where the right-wing parties are much, much stronger than in the urban centers. But what's going on with the urban population? I mean, we probably have at some point to do an entire podcast just on this. I think the urban population or parts of the inner city populations have gone completely crazy.
There's no denying that. The thing, though, that when I hear about this, and I'll just make this quick comment, and then let's take some super chats. But when I hear about the rise of Muslims and politics in America, I can't help but feel like this is the system, right? In other words, I see it more as a reflection of, again, the voters, not so much Muslims. This Mamdani and all these people, Omar and this new guy, they're doing, they are Muslims, and they probably, I mean, Islamist means they're serious about their faith, okay, and they're all that. But what do we say? But the reason they're getting into power is because, well, they're doing it legally. There's nothing you can say. They're running for a race and people are voting for them. So the question is, why are people voting for people who are obviously anti-Western, anti-American? Audibly, that to me is the real issue, right?
And that is a serious question because again, I'm not denying, right? For example, that, and this is a fact, that this is not a conspiracy theory, that people like George Soros are supporting financially specific candidates, right? Candidates with whom you and I probably don't share much in common. But as you said, unless there is evidence that elections have been rigged, it is still the people who vote for them. Zoran Mamdani was supported by Alex Soros, no denying of that. But ultimately, he was voted into office by the people of New York. So
and the overwhelming majority of them are not Muslim.
Precisely. So as I said, I'm not saying, as I always say, that my problem with conspiracies is not that they don't have elements of truth. My problem is when they become like monocausal explanations. What I mean with this, if George Soros would not exist, that then the idea is there would be no Zoran Mamdani. I don't think that's the case. Then there would be somebody else who would funding it. And that's the same, by the way, the same argument, just going very quickly to the Morocco thing, is if a nuclear bomb would be dropped on Israel tomorrow, does anybody seriously believe that Muslim migration to Europe would stop? That's a completely absurd proposition. Right, that Morocco will no longer pursue its geopolitical interests, that people in Sudan, people in Syria, people from Afghanistan, that they will all of a sudden say, oh, Israel is gone, now I no longer want to come to Europe. Even if you can, I know there are comments by the Ben Smotriches and I'm not denying any of this. But again, this idea that nobody in the world has agency except the Americans and the Israelis.
It's a very
It's
racist idea too, by the way.
it's a
Because
racist idea, and
yeah,
it's you let everybody else off the hook.
yeah,
Pedro
yeah,
Sanchez is a terrible prime minister who, with his amnesty law and lots of other things, made this happen. Again, that the Americans and the Israelis probably looked on this, in an agreeable fashion, that they said, haha, you deserve this. I'm not denying any of this. But to basically say that Spain had nothing to do with it and making an entire law that says, if you're illegal in the country, don't worry, you can apply for legal status. That had nothing to do with it. It was some secret phone call into the king's palace in Morocco. I'm sorry, that's too easy an explanation for me.
yeah. No, I agree. I agree with what you said, which is basically it's not that conspiracy theories are false. It's just that it's like you said, it's a monocause. There's much more to it, and people do have agency. Okay, let's check out some of these super chats. I'm sure there's going to be some questions for you. Lies destroy lives. Raymond, please seriously consider making your recent Substack article, The Rise of Loser Christianity. Oh, yeah. I wrote that, came out today, available for free to all. Some of your articles are just too important to restrict. Okay, thanks. Maybe I'll turn it actually into a YouTube video. He's referring to an article I wrote today, which is actually very pertinent to what we're discussing. So let me actually just explain it. I don't know if you watched, I didn't even watch it, but I was told about this commercial. It's in the World Cup, this last one. Apparently there's this organization which is supposed to be Christian, and it's called He Gets Us. He would be Jesus. And anyway, it has a habit of like putting these commercials that they don't sit well with me. So the last one, okay, so one that came out in the Super Bowl 2024, which I also saw, it was basically all that. Okay, you're gonna like this. I don't know if you know about this commercial, but it just showed images, and the images were people washing people's feet. But before long, and it was different like scenes, different image pictures. And then before long, though, you start seeing there's a pattern here. Most of the people on their hands and knees washing kind of look like white American Christians. And the people getting their feet washed were, well, one was a Muslim woman in a hijab. One was like a Mexican migrant who illegally crossed because she's at the border. One was a priest washing the feet of like a black, trans man, she thing. So you understand the idea. Now, the new one about this article, it's called Losing. And so here's a big sporting event, World Cup. And the first image is like a sports guy, and it just says, "What if you lose? Why don't you lose?" And then it literally says, "Why don't you lose the argument intentionally?" And this is supposed to be Christian, and it just reminds me, I'm so tired of it. It's this idea that to be a Christian, you have to just capitulate to everything and anything. I'm in an argument and I'm standing for the truth. Well, why don't I just lose? I mean, it's almost like basically who benefits from this but anti-Christian forces. I can't beat you because you have the truth. So can you please lose intentionally? That's a good Christian. That's a good boy. Pat you on the head. So anyway, that's what that article is about. I'd like you to respond to that as well, because I think this is part of the issues that we're talking about. It's this idea I call it doormat Christianity. Now I call it loser Christianity, whereby you make yourself a loser because that's what Jesus apparently wants. But by the way, and I make this point in the article, is that Jesus did not do that. Jesus argued with his enemies, the Pharisees. He even argued with Satan and won. And he, of course, made a whip of cords and overturned tables. So yeah, he wasn't into being a loser either. So anyway, I don't know. What do you think?
No, I think you're right. I mean, this was because you mentioned The Passion of the Christ by Mel Gibson, and one of the things I liked about this movie so much is his depiction of Jesus. And one of the things that he was criticized mostly for was this, right? Again, this kind of Hollywoodized version of Christ and Christianity that he is. I'm exaggerating, but a Palestinian socialist hippie who was constantly running around turning his other cheek, and that is just a completely. I mean, we all know what Jesus did when he got into the temple, and as you said, and then that he was. Whether he was, I'm in no position. I'm a Christian myself, but of course I'm in no position to know whether he was now of. Whether he was the Son of God or not, but whatever he was an incredibly, incredibly impressive figure, and he was not some naive dolt who was basically, being pushed around. But this is the way in which we get Christianity presented today. It's the kind of say yes to everything religion, which it isn't. I mean, the idea that Christianity is relativistic or libertarian is just so at odds with. I'm not a theologian. My gaps on knowledge are huge there, but that just seems to me a very odd interpretation. But it has been imbibed. We talked about this in another podcast, if you remember. I mean, partially we had, and I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but we had previous popes who sounded a little bit like this. And it wasn't the current pope again who said something that he wants to express his deep respect towards the migrants. So they are the leadership, not the Christian, not Catholicism, but the leadership. Sometimes I feel, man, is it possible that they are maybe part of the problem and not part of the solution?
Well, there's a famous picture of Pope Francis on his hands and knees washing the feet of like African migrants. So, yeah. Anyway, all right. Belgians are okay. That's too long. Freedom Party, AU2, popular in 90s, 26% vote. I like Herbert Kick, but I'm concerned he and others never able to implement policies. No results in 30 years. Are you aware of any of this?
Yeah, of course. He's speaking. Belgians are evil. Trust me. I assume that he's not Belgian.
Oh, that's the name. Yeah.
Yeah. Is referring to my country. It's the Austrian Freedom Party. That's correct. They had 26% of the vote in 1999, but they got 29% during the last election and came in first. And they are currently polling at 38%. So it's only a matter when we have elections. But there's one thing that the Belgian hater is of course correct, is that if they cannot implement what they're promising, then, as you know, this is always my big fear. If the so-called alternative parties, from the AfD to the Freedom Party, if they cannot not fulfill what they promise, people will turn to the even more radical option. I mean, this is what the media in the West still doesn't get. The current so-called far right, that's the moderate option. Right, because they still, if you listen to what they say, what they write, they still want to operate within the constitutional framework, which I'm all for. But if they fail, this is this weird idea. So I like the question very much. This is this weird idea because it reflects the sentiment so many people have. If they get into power and they cannot deliver, people will not then say, okay, fine, we tried these parties, it didn't work, we go back to the old parties. They will say, the problem is not that these guys were too radical, the problem is that these guys were not radical enough. And at some point you say, maybe the Constitution itself is the problem, and we have to operate outside of the Constitution. And whether it's then the American Constitution, the French Constitution, the German Constitution, the Austrian, doesn't matter. So this is what I think many people within, I think your viewers and most common sense people know it, but I think this is what the media has to get and what Hollywood and everybody has to get, that those people you call far right and fascist at the moment, that's the moderate option. If they fail, then the radical option comes, and that is going to be much, much more ugly than anything that we can imagine at this point.
Well, I've often wondered, and my modern European history is not as good as my medieval history, but when you look at the character of Hitler, okay, there's of course the popular way of understanding him, which is he's.
We made it almost an hour. We made it almost an hour, Raymond, without mentioning Hitler.
I know. Anyway, hey, we're talking about Europe, so he has to come up.
Yeah,
the question is this, because I've read this, and I don't know what the truth is, and maybe you do, maybe you don't, but we can talk about it. There's this idea based on what you're talking about, which is, if people are trying to vote for moderate voices and they keep failing and they keep failing, then they go to the extreme, right? And so there's this idea that that's why Hitler was popular in Germany, because before him, Weimar Republic and all that business was just constantly failing, and World War I and, all the treaties that were seen as exploiting Germany, et cetera, kept getting bad, to the point that that everyone just fell madly in love with a guy who is extreme radical fascist, basically. So is that sort of like what you're warning about, which is possibly something like that could happen?
No, it is, because my conviction is, and I said this on your podcast, I think the first one we did together, is still that people in the 20s and 30s, and it was not just happening in Germany, it was happening in Italy, it was happening in Hungary, it was happening in Austria, everywhere. They voted for radical parties, but the promise of these radical parties was basically order, right? That was their promise. Exactly what you just said. They said, listen, everything is chaotic, everything seems, out of order, everything seems to be unpredictable. We bring back predictability, right? We bring back order in the streets. So in a sense, people vote for radical parties if they promise normalcy. Now that they then ultimately did not bring what you or I would describe as normalcy, that's another issue. I mean, that's the danger. But that is, I think, what most people want. I think there is, and I'm one of them. There's this, for me at least, a certain degree of boredom is actually good. By boredom, I mean that the world is predictable, right? That things are not crazy, that you don't have this sense that everything becomes overwhelming. And maybe this is just because you and I, and of course many of your viewers as well, that if you are in the infosphere, so to speak, but I sometimes feel overwhelmed. I admit it openly. I go online and there's and it's most of it is true information. That's the important thing. I mean, you're not talking about just AI generated stuff. So what's happening in Europe, what's happening in the US, what's happening in the Middle East, all of that is actually happening, and it is so much, it's so overwhelming. Then domestically you have all these absurd things happening that sometimes, right, and then people say, okay, we need some party, something to come along to at least in our lived experience make things predictable and calm again. I think for that calmness, people would be willing to go very far. And I immediately add, I'm one of, just to be clear, because I'm not speaking from high up and say, oh, those people. No. I include myself in those people. But take the UK. I think today there was another stabbing attack in London. I don't know what the immediate cause was. I think one person died. 3 others were injured. And nobody was.
I'm sure it was a
like
native
this.
British guy, Yeah,
probably some Nigel guy, right?
Yeah,
this is, and this is, and if somebody comes along and promises to say we will recreate a world where you can go out by your front door, where you can open up the newspaper, and this, and these are, I know people always mock, or the media mocks this, but clean streets, safe streets, right? A sense of security, less graffiti on the wall. That is important. I mean, I never understood this kind of, when the mocking of people tending small gardens, for example. But that is something that makes that has a huge impact. I'm quite serious here. A tidy city, a tidy street, a sense of tidiness is something that has a huge impact on how people perceive the world. If the wider world is completely chaotic, it is a good thing if at least my immediate vicinity is not. And if there is a political party that promises to de-chaotify my immediate surroundings and create conditions where my values, where my sense of justice and fairness is reflected, I'm going to vote for that party.
Yep, wise, logical words, which I agree with completely.
It was a little bit of a word salad, but but
it was good.
English is not my first language.
Okay, lies destroy lives. It's easy to blackmail weak, immoral people. Yeah, it is. And maybe that's one of the big problems that's going on. Gunner's mate RAA, you are a man amongst men. Thank you, Raymond. Oh, well, thank you very much. Great chat, Ralph. Okay, thank you.
I think he meant me.
Yeah. All right.
I think he meant me. He was thanking you for inviting me. Yeah.
No doubt. All right. 10 jewels, gold coin. Thanks. Lies destroy lives. Perhaps more than ever, our young men need advice from godly men. Have you read Greville MacDonald's biography about his father, George MacDonald? MacDonald was a very godly man. Yeah, George MacDonald, I like him. I've mentioned him before. Lies Destroy Lives mentions him a lot, and he should. He's actually pretty good. Great theologian. Gunner's mate, new member. Great. Thanks for joining, Gunner. Hanif Ashu. As conservative Christians are being unfairly labeled far-right and fascists, is there not an argument that in reality Sharia law is a far-right and fascist regime? P.S. Muhammad skipped leg day. There's this leg day thing going on because I was asked about it. Anyway, yeah, I mean, of course, there's an argument that, the argument that I make is that Sharia law is a real thing and it's antithetical to Western law. So it does not in any way, shape, or form belong in Western nations. The problem is Sharia law is not just this weird thing that some radical Muslims do. It's actually the flip side of Islam. If you're an observant Muslim, you do Sharia law. So to bring in Muslims into America who are openly observant, yeah, they're engaged in Sharia law one way or the other. So I think, what do you think of that?
Well, I generally think that the question is a very good one, but I never really liked this idea that, to try to squeeze, for example, any kind of ideology into the fascist camp. Fascism is fascism. At one point we can make an entire,
What is
podcast
fascism? It's a
on
bundle of sticks, the fasces that the Romans would walk around with, right?
Because the idea is that
symbolizing authority, yeah.
yes, and the idea is right that a single stick can break, but a bundle of sticks cannot. But of course, it was built on this perception that one of the wrong, this was even more true for National Socialism. And by the way, they never really called themselves fascists, so this would be another debate. But just in short, right, they had this idea that historically, or kind of particularly Christianity, with this idea that the weak deserve particular care, right? This idea that the last will be first and the first will be last. So that they said, well, this was a wrong turn, and therefore, right, we have to go back to a system of society where the strong are being supported. What I find one of the most intriguing in the sense of absurd and overlooked elements, particularly of National Socialism, was that one of the fiercest criticisms or one of the causes of their extensive anti-Semitism, particularly of Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, was that he claimed, or he, in his mind, he said that the biggest cabal and conspiracy by the Jews was Christianity. Because he said it was Christianity that made the Germans weak. And by the way, Hitler said the same thing. Hitler said if the point at Tours and Poitiers, if the Franks would have lost and Europe would have been Islamified and the Germans would have become Muslims, it would have been much better. Because
this goes back to Nietzsche, actually.
True. True. Although, sorry. Although in Nietzsche's defense, Nietzsche abhorred anti-Semitism because he thought that was stupid too. But his sister,
but he saw Christianity as this weak thing that was kind of foisted by Jews.
Yes, a slave, right? For him, it was a slave ideology, and the Germans or the Nazis then said, well, it is, and Christianity, of course, is basically again their words, not mine. To be very clear, we're doing a historical recap here, but he said this was basically the big Jewish conspiracy that they infected the German people with this belief system that then led them to embrace weakness, and this is why we are now in the condition in which is why I always find it absurd when, like Mehdi Hassan, when they use the Nazi club to end an argument, when basically the Nazis would have been the biggest fans of them, and they had this huge Himmler had this 50-year plan to de-Christianize Germany, because they always say yes, but why didn't the German army had belt buckles that said God with us and all of this? They said, well, wasn't the Nazi regime ultimately a Christian regime? No, it wasn't. They just realized that the Germans themselves were still so Christian, right, that they couldn't get rid of it. If you look at, going too far, but it's still interesting. The biggest dividing line between who voted for the Nazis and who didn't was confessional. Protestants voted in large numbers, especially at the beginning for the Nazis. Catholics did not. So this I think also tells us.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah. And in that sense, that was a great question. It's really interesting because it shows you even that the concept of wokeness and a lot of the things that we discuss on your show, it has now, I believe, also infected Catholicism. But the bigger issue, and I'm not. Don't get me wrong, because of Martin Luther, I have a great respect for himself. But Protestantism has been a bigger problem there. Right?
If you look at the historically Protestant nations of Europe, they're the ones suffering from everything we're discussing.
Yeah.
Right? England, Germany, France is not Protestant, but it's ultra-secular. Sweden, the Scandinavian nations, they're the ones that are having a lot of issues with these migrant questions.
Yeah, because, right, exactly, as you say, because in a sense, right, secularism is, of course, a Christian phenomenon, and it's particularly, I would say, a Protestant Christian phenomenon. Now, to be very clear, poor Martin Luther, pretty much, he triggered the very opposite of what he wanted to achieve. I mean, if you look at Martin Luther, he wanted, I'm being facetious here, so no offense to it. I'm a Christian myself, so please forgive me, but one of the great things about Christianity is that we have a sense of humor. But I would say that Martin Luther wanted to create something like the Wahhabi version of Christianity. So he said, the Catholics, they have become decadent and fat. We need to get back to...
I think the founding Protestants would be aghast at Protestantism today.
Oh, absolutely.
They're turning in their graves at what it is today. Yeah,
I could not agree more. If you would show again a Protestant pastor in the rainbow outfit and blessings.
Jonathan Edwards. I don't know if you know Jonathan Edwards. Sinners in the hands of an angry God.
it would be completely absurd. But this was the thing, right? Once they created the tools to question Catholicism, and in many cases justifiably so. But of course, ultimately, these same tools were then used to question not just Protestantism as well, but Christianity as a whole. And one of the things that we no longer, or that significant parts of the Western elite no longer understands, or no longer is capable of, is truly believing in something. Right? I'm a huge, critical reflection, very important, all of this. But I think in a healthy psychology, that's my personal opinion, there need to be some areas where you solidly believe in something because it gives you comfort. I'm personally, I'm more probably of a nationalist than a religious person, but this is one of the things, this gives me comfort, because people always say, so why are you a nationalist? It is pure coincidence that you're born in Austria, right? It is, but it's also pure coincidence that I was born to my parents and I love them as well. But I
think this is actually the whole issue. It's because people have nothing to believe in that this is happening in the West. What's there to fight for? Why should I worry about migrants? Why should I, do anything about this or that? Because I don't believe in anything. I've been turned into a materialist, and the only thing I believe in is as long as I have a good physical life, just leave me alone, do whatever you want. And I think that's led to all of this, what's happening. But anyway, let's continue with some of these super chats. So, lies destroy lives. We'll all be spending lots of time and money just trying to survive if things get really bad. Better to spend money now by supporting champions like these two men.
Thank you go.
For that. Yeah. So, actually, at this point, why don't you tell everyone, Ralph, where they can find you and support you?
For English speakers, it's not yet possible, unfortunately, but I'm working on that.
It's only here with me.
Yeah.
Okay. All right,
but I'm happy to support. If I can support those who support Raymond, I'm doing my fair share.
Well, thank you for that. Well, what's your Twitter or X?
Oh, I have to. The next time we do this, I use my X name. It's a funny story. My grandfather never knew how to pronounce my name, so he pronounced it completely wrong, and I used his wrong pronunciation. But it turned out it's I can't pronounce it either. So every time somebody asks me what's your Twitter handle, I can't say it because I can't pronounce it. So I got to work on this as well.
But your name's it's kind of cool. It has the word hammer. What's a Schoell? What's a Schoellhammer? Is there a meaning there?
I think there was. I think it was some like iron workers in either North Rhine-Westphalia or somewhere. I recently got an email. I originally thought it was spam, but it was a serious one about somebody who did some what do you call it?
DNA.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And apparently there were two Schoellhammers who fought in the American War of Independence, and another one who fought for the northern states during the Civil War. So I think I would deserve.
You're an honorary American, yeah.
I think so. Yes, absolutely.
Well, I think most Americans would prefer you over, another Abdul for sure. All right, Kevin, saw your books on my e-reader. Thoughts on e-readers? E-readers? What's this? Is that like an e-book? Maybe eventually they'll appear like that. Hey, Carlos, 200 joules. Lies destroy lives. This is how fear can sometimes be turned into excitement. There is no harm in being afraid. The only harm is in doing what fear tells you. Fear is not your master. Laugh in his face and he will run away. And that's a quote from George MacDonald. Good, useful quote. I think the fear point is important. Actually, a lot of people are afraid and are not talking. You and I are talking, and it's good. And this is why people are listening, because this is on everyone's mind, but so many people are unable to, articulate it. And they have fear. I've met a lot of people, I'm sure you have too, where when we talk about these topics, their fear is palpable. and rightfully so, I think. Any thoughts on that?
No, absolutely. I mean, this this is this again what you saw happening in Spain, right? This idea, and you saw it, by the way. Also, I'm sure that many of your viewers saw this, and I think we haven't talked about this yet. This interview that Elon Musk gave to The Economist, and you could kind of hear that all the things that Elon Musk said, right? I think resonated with a significant number of people. And the argument is always, if just Elon Musk and others would stop talking about these problems, the problems would not exist. And that's, for me, the most bothersome element. I mean, migration is the best example here. If, particularly, again, in the media, because the people, I think, have realized it, but I always bring it back to 2016. Donald Trump ran almost exclusively his first campaign on the issue of migration, and he won the election. He was outspent by Hillary Clinton. He had the entire media against him. He had the entire cultural establishment against him. He had everybody against him. But he fixated, he honed in for the most part on the one issue, right, where people intuitively understood that the media, that the political class is lying to them. And that is the issue of migration. I think after Corona, right, the other issues have added to this. But for me, migration is always the key. The gaslighting that has been applied, also in the United States, to most of the Western people in this particular issue is something that everybody deep down knows. And Donald Trump was the first one in his own crass way, but that was effective, to articulate it. And this is why I won. I mean, I give you one concrete example. It always makes me laugh. There are still people who claim there are 12 to 15 illegal migrants in the United States. That's the same number we heard 26 years ago. That's half of what I think Joe Biden let into the country. So I'm wondering if there would be a genuine census in the US. I wonder how many people there are actually legally. And I wonder about the same thing in Europe, because as I said, Spain expected 500,000 people to apply for legalization. It turned out officially to be 1.5 million. I wouldn't surprise if in truth it's 2 million. So my suspicion is that to a large extent, we have no idea how many people from where are actually in our countries. Again,
this is why I also think. This is why I also think when I hear like England's Muslim population is only 6-7%, I find that the legal population. I think it's much larger than that. I don't think they're. I don't even know how they could, if they wanted to, actually accurately measure it. But speaking of Trump, you brought something to my mind. Are you, in his crass ways? But are you aware of? I think at the beginning of the year, he came up with a security document where he talked about civilizational erasure happening in Europe, and I thought that was pretty spot on of that document and the way he talked about it. And I also remember at the time a lot of European leaders were outraged that he dared say something like that. Do you recall this?
No, yes, I think it was in the National Security Strategy that was published. I believe it was in November there. But and listen, like there's given the war in the Middle East, and there's a lot to criticize. I think there are many things. Who gets everything right? But overall, I believe that the current administration and Trump and his some of the people in his administration and everybody, but I think some of them do get the bigger picture, and I think they were sincere about this threat of civilizational erasure, and they do. I mean, if you look at the comments that happened after what happened in Spain, I think they do take this issue seriously. Now, nothing is ever perfect, but one has always to consider what's the alternative. And this is what always bothers me about many conservatives, to be honest, would I prefer a George Washington-esque figure? Certainly. Or a Charles de Gaulle-like figure? Absolutely. But I think given the alternatives, I still believe that Donald Trump was the right call and that the American people did the right thing. I don't think that a Kamala Harris administration would have been better. It's a historical counterfactual. We don't know, but I sincerely believe this.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Hermetic signal. Do you think we are living through the failure of secular liberalism? What do you think, Ralph? It's a profound question, isn't it?
It is a profound question. So I'm thinking, I'm intrigued by the combination of secular and liberalism, because I'm wondering, could a non-secular liberalism, so to speak, or is a non-secular liberalism even possible? I would say, but I think this is what the question is implying. I think what we definitely see is the end of the, now I have to make my own word creation. Of the, let's call that's, I think I got it. And I hope, I have to see in the chat if the viewer would agree with this. I would call it an unanchored liberalism. What I mean by this, even if you are a convinced liberal, somebody who is very tolerant, I think even that tolerance must come from a certain position in which you're anchored, right? For example, you are a Western society. There's always an argument with Islam, right? That freedom of religion, yes, sure, but again, we tolerate Islam. Or any other kind of this, and they make the same argument. To be quite frank, and this is way too much information I'm sharing here. This is one day I'm going to regret all of this, but we tolerate certain ideas and ideologies up to a point, but there is a hierarchy of values, right? As I said, this is when you want to call it a Christian nationalist, call it a Christian nationalist. But this means for me that there are certain things that are part of our traditions that are hierarchically above other ideas. So for example, because this is often the argument that comes when they say, well, Islam has certain similarities, eating pork, for example, or their views on homosexuality are very similar to Judaism's views on homosexuality. So why are you against one and not the other? Because one is not driving cars into Christopher Street days and into parades. So therefore, I can continue to tolerate them. If they would start to do this, my tolerance would come very quickly to an end. If there is a political candidate of the DSA, right, the Democratic Socialists in America, who says we have to bring down America and death to the US, this is something where I say, I'm not sure if I have to tolerate this. You know what I mean? Again, I'm developing this as a week, because then liberalism turns from secular into suicidal liberalism, where I say you have to embrace every idea, even if this idea is designed to destroy the very society that tolerates that idea. I think that's for me the biggest problem. I call it an unanchored liberalism, because we no longer have anything to oppose it, because nobody dares to say, I'm a nationalist, I'm a patriot. I mean, we in this chat and you and I do. But I think overall this has become problematic. But it was a great question, and I have to think about it in greater detail. I liked it very much.
And I think we actually had a very recent example of what you're talking about, which is, you were talking about, it's one thing, hey, you have freedom of religion, but I can only tolerate so much. But the recent example I'm referring to is King Charles changing his title from Defender of the Faith, meaning Christianity, to Defender of the Faiths. Okay, it's like you don't have to be right. That's a perfect example.
No, it is a perfect, and even I just recently read this. If you think that the supposed godfather of maybe more libertarianism, but John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill was an outspoken nationalist. He said a common policy can only work if people feel affection and sympathy for each other. And this is, of course, very, very true. The idea, and I'm not necessarily a fan of the whole entire post-liberal movement, but I do admit that one of the problems of liberalism in its modern iteration, not of its 19th century version, is this atomistic attitude, right? That ultimately it is you as Raymond and me as Ralph, and we are completely unmoored from everything else. And this is not how it works. I feel solidarity, I feel affection towards people with whom I share something. And sometimes people say it's all about distance and skin color. No, not necessarily. I'm sure, I have more in common with a black conservative than with a white pink-haired lady who says queers for Palestine. So again, DNA-wise, I probably have more in common with her, but I think I much rather live in a state with the black conservative guy. So this can, again, so this is another thing, right? Which is why I hate the racialization of so much of the debate quite a bit. But every serious thinker understood very well that a certain sense of shared commonalities, of affection, of sympathy is very important. And again, I don't live in the United States, but I love the United States. I think it's a great country. And if I listen to those people that are currently being endorsed by the Democrat Party, who openly share on their social media that they hate America and that America needs to be punished and the world would be a better place without the US, yada, yada, it pains me. And I think that again, I would be more deserving, I'm just saying, of an American passport as those people. Just
Your point, your point about how people have to have a connection, and there's nothing wrong with that. The way but here's how I know that the people who say you can't know better. Okay, because what I'm trying to say is, the elements and the forces around us that don't want you to feel moored to anything, and if you do, you're a racist or whatever. However, which way you explain it, the reason you know that they really don't believe that is when other people do it, they don't complain. They treat it as naturally. So if let's say if a black man comes up and says, "I only want to marry a black woman," oh, they'll be like, "Of course, that's normal. What's wrong with that?" But as Muhammad Ali famously did, I remember, but the boxer. But if a white man says that, oh, how dare you? You're a racist, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's like they understand that this sort of whatever collective identity that people naturally develop. They're okay with it when it's non-whites, non-Europeans. But once a white person does it, it's like, okay, you're a horrible person. No, you have to be disassociated. And I honestly think this is part and parcel with what we're talking about. This sort of abnegation and rejection of Western Christian heritage, where you have to break away from it because how dare you have some kind of collective identity. So they do know better because they don't mind it when others. If a Muslim says, I only want to be with Muslims, oh, that's fine. We understand. We're not going to pressure you. Nobody's bothering Muslim nations and saying, hey, you have to take in whatever religion refugees or anything like that. Right? It's expected. They have their own way. I even remember there was this thing about Saudi Arabia had all these air-conditioned tents and it wouldn't allow Palestinian refugees to go and use them, right? And no complaint about that. So anyway, let's we're almost done with these. Mario, Ceuta is pronounced as, you put an Arabic translation, Ceuta. Oh, okay, I'm sure that's how it would be pronounced in Arabic. I don't know, is that how it's pronounced in Spanish? Because it is, I assume, a Spanish word ultimately. I am Ryan. Enjoy listening to your videos in the background and learning from an authoritative source, very accessible in ways other formats are not. TY both. Thank you both. Okay, thank you. Lies destroy lives. If you haven't read Greville McDonald's biography about his dad, did I already read that one? From okay, maybe not. If you haven't read Greville McDonald's biography about his dad, please use some of the money from these super chats to buy it. I'm deeply impressed with how his love of God and consequent character developed. Okay, I am a fan of George MacDonald, so that one will definitely be on my list. Okay, those are the super chats. All right, Ralph. So going back to this Ceuta business, what is it? A harbinger of things to come? Is this just an aberration? Was it just a sudden, 50, 60, 70,000, I think you said the number is, migrants suddenly appearing and then slowly disappearing just for fun, or was it just a political stunt by Morocco? What does it say of things to come, if any?
Well, apparently, this has been the latest news from earlier today that another mass. What's the best? Another mass wave, I guess is the correct term, is expected for August 15th. So that would be in thereabouts about 10 days from now. Because
so they're planning it. They're telling us when we're going to send in.
So the question is, once again, is this then abated or is it supported by the Moroccan government? But
well, if they're giving us a date, that means this is planned, right?
Well, they claim the Moroccan authorities claim that they just observe and hear what's happening on social media, but they got nothing to do with it. But I think it also means that but it also means they don't do anything about it.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, there is, just to look at the raw numbers. I mean, if you look one country like Nigeria, I think in 1970. Great Britain still had a larger population than Nigeria, and I think if on current trajectories, probably Nigeria is supposed to have more people than the entire European Union very soon. So of course that population pressure, particularly from Sub-Saharan Africa, I mean that is remain an issue for the years to come. Which is, I mean, this is the uncomfortable question. If living conditions cannot be created, and this is in a particular European perspective, but if conditions cannot be created that people stay in these countries, they will continue to move. So of course, can you create truly a fortress Europe, right? Can you really completely prevent these things from happening? Or what would be the alternatives? I mean, in a sense, without going too deep in history once again, but there will be a day when historians will have to admit that particularly the decolonization movement, in the, not in principle, but in the velocity in which it was executed, was a mistake. I think if these countries would have been gradually being, moved towards independence, if it would have been ensured that institutions would have survived, that these countries can use their full potential, I think many of the problems we have nowadays wouldn't exist. I mean, if you take a country like Zimbabwe or Rhodesia, as it was called earlier in the day, I think Robert Mugabe made the situation much, much worse. Whatever the British did, what he did was significantly worse. I would even go so far to say that Afro-Marxism in many ways was probably worse than colonialism. Now, of course, you can make the convincing argument that Afro-Marxism was a consequence of colonialism, and I would agree with this, so that would be a fine argument. But I think this was a massive mistake. These people were by no ways ready to run their own states, with a few exceptions. Botswana, you see it a little bit in Rwanda, so some of them are turning a corner, but the majority is not.
This is an interesting observation. Why are people going to the West? Well, they like how the West is run. But that was the whole point of colonialism. It was Western powers were in African, Asian nations, gradually developing them into a Western paradigm, which is what people want, right? Because that's why they're all rushing and flooding into Western nations. So the logic would have been, instead of, the West is just Europe or America and everyone has to flood there, they could have had it in their own nations and it developed it that way. And it's so that another example of how colonialism is not this horrible blight on Western Western history. It was actually, if it went to fruition, and this is actually why, if you look at the countries, I've looked especially closely at Egypt, but if you look at them under colonialism, they were actually better. Egypt was actually a better run society. It was, if you just look at the way people dressed, they looked Western. They didn't have the hijab or the burqa or or any of that. But also, you look at the records of, let's say, Coptic Christians. They said this was a time where there was actually, we were the closest ever to equality and actual religious freedom and plurality, and there was technology and so yeah, it's kind of I suppose that's one of the arguments that you will rarely ever hear on behalf of colonialism.
I think you're right, and let me add on another argument which I sometimes feel is so overlooked. I mean, it is nothing new, and it is not always bad. I mean, I guess the first intuitive reaction to what I'm about to say is a negative one, but so please hear me out. But it is not completely uncommon to at least partially and embrace almost, a former colonial power's ideas. I mean, in a sense, Christianity was, it's in a positive way, but Christianity was colonizing religiously, ideologically, the Roman Empire. But historically, ancient Europe was not monotheistic. And the same then later on, like Europeans, and I do it too, right? We look back at our antique Roman history, but I'm German, right? So my ancestry is not Roman, but I don't trace, I mean, some do, but I don't really see my heritage as the Germanic tribes. I see it as Roman civilization. So there's nothing wrong with admitting, and to see this even further back, the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation. Basically, there was a massive movement in medieval times to re-erect the very empire, the very civilization that they destroyed. So there is, again, nothing wrong if African nations would hypothetically say, we want to rebuild ourselves some of the things that originally came from these imperial powers. This is something the Europeans have done as well, and they were very successful in doing so.
And it would solve the migrant crisis, because their own countries would become what they want. It's amazing. Your point, though, I like your point about where people trace their heritage, and I've always found it interesting because you're mentioning the Holy Roman German the Holy Roman Empire and the Germanic roots involved with that. And you look today, whenever, let's say, Germans or North Europeans, it's like there's this movement to actually kind of skip that long Christian medieval epoch and trace it to like pagan times. Okay, so now it's really cool for the Scandinavians to just link themselves to the Vikings. Never that long interval of Christianity. Same thing with the Germans. I mean, we even saw this, going back to Hitler. But I remember back then there was this kind of move trying to connect to Herman the German, Arminius, who fought the Romans, Teutoburg Wall, AD 9. And that sort of thing, and kind of jettisoning the long Christian civilizational history. And I even see it in innocuous ways. A lot of people, the Greek, these sort of Philhellenes, these people who are just obsessed with the classical Greco-Roman world. It's like they'll just show you how, oh yeah, Europe and the West traces everything right back to the Greeks and the Romans, and then 1,500 years of Christian civilization is just missing from that calculus.
And I think it's also because we talked earlier today about stuff that would be great for a movie. But if you look at the Christianization of Europe, right, you had these early Christians, whether for Frankish or other things, and they went to these tribes. There's one story, I think I read it in Tom Holland's book Dominion, and the tribes they were worshiping a tree, and so then this monk or whatever it was goes to this tree and basically chops down this tree and says, and now I'm gonna tell you what who the true God is. So the Christianization of Europe is a tremendously fascinating, interesting, adventurous story, and we don't tell it like this. And I think this is then why this romanticization of pre-Christian times come, because once again, ultimately, and this is the difference between Christianity and Islam, ultimately Christianity spread, I mean, you know this better than I do, so I hope I'm not saying anything wrong here, but I think it spread much more by convincing than it spread by the sword. I'm not saying it did not at all, but there's this famous, who is Al-Kuin, I think I mentioned on your show before, right? This advisor to Charles the Great. Supposedly they were taking baths with each other. I don't know what that was all about, but be that as it may. And Charles the Great basically said, we're just gonna go over there and we just put them to the sword and make them swear fealty to Christianity. And then his advisor said, you know what? There is this certain risk that if people just convert to Christianity because otherwise you kill them, they might not going to be honest about their conversion. So let's try a different way. And again, these are great stories, but why is this so important? Because it shows you one thing that I believe everybody has to understand, that in order to create societal change, you don't need 51%, you don't need 60%, you need even a very small dedicated minority can leave a massive imprint or can fundamentally change a society. Because Europe wasn't Christian, it became Christian because there was a small number of true believers, of dedicated Christians. And that's the same in Europe now. If you have non-committed Christians, but 5-6% of very committed Muslims, the future of the continent by default is going to be Islamic. And I think this is what so many analysts don't understand. Yeah,
I was watching a sermon that said just like that, a Muslim in America, and he was basically saying, look, we're a tiny minority, but if we stick together and we always vote for the Islamic, candidate, the Islamic issue, yeah, we can get far. And that's absolutely true. A small core can go very far.
I mean, look at a completely different movement where I think the same thing applies. I mean, what percentage of the population is truly transgender? We are talking probably about less than 1%. But by God, those who support this movement, they are so dedicated, they are so vehemently and uncompromising in their dedication that all of a sudden you have entire societies basically having to adapt. Take the Pride Progress Month. They have to adapt to the will of a very small, probably less than 1% of the population, because they have the dedication, they have the commitment, they have the will. And I think this is what so many don't get. Just because you're 90% on paper, it means nothing if you are, whatever is at stake, if you're lukewarm against it. So again, if you have 10% in the US, that really hate the US, right? That's going to be a real problem if the other 90% are lukewarm towards the US. So this is the thing. The differentiation is not anti-Americanism and lukewarm Americanism. You need just as forceful a pro-Americanism or a pro-Westernism or a pro, whatever your thing is. But this idea that, as long as a movement doesn't have 51%, they're no threat. Oh, no, this is not how society works at all.
Yeah, exactly. And then, think of how much worse it is in Europe, where you actually have 10% or whatnot. Lies destroy lives. I don't know about letting them do their thing in their own countries. While the adherents of the evil religion sit in any parliament in the world, there will be problems. I believe evil religion, he's referring to Islam. I don't know. What do you think? Should they not have the right to do whatever they want in their own countries too? That's possibly a controversial kind of thing. I personally believe that, I'm kind of a live and let live kind of guy, where I believe, of course, if you're in my country, you're going to do things my way. I'm not, if Muslims want to live according to Sharia within Muslim territory, I don't know, that doesn't bother me too much. What do you think?
I mean, to be quite honest, that's the same what I said about Judaism before. If they want to live according to Sharia law in their own private life, I think I can live with that as well. The problem always starts if you want to force it onto somebody else. Right. And as you said, I mean, this is what's being preached in many mosques, right? I mean, this is what's being said in the streets. The idea is that we are in a transition period where we might now, to use the term of the previous viewer, where we might be secular liberals now, but at the end station, we're all going to be part of the House of Islam, the Dar al-Islam. I mean, it is this is the thing. There are many, nobody denies it, there are many peaceful, there are many moderate, whatever you want to call it, Muslims. Nobody denies this. But if you look at the members of the Muslim faith who are really into it, let's put it this term, right? Then it becomes by default expansionary, because it is part, if I read your books correctly, I mean, this is just part of the DNA of the faith. So you can be a moderate Muslim in the sense that you simply take certain elements of your own faith not very seriously, probably in the way that I'm a Catholic, right? I'm not a very good Catholic, I have to admit. But if I would take these things seriously, right, then of course I would have to behave differently. And I think it's the same with Islam. And then serious Islam, I believe, is not compatible with the West. Again, secularized Islam, where you're born Muslim, but you don't really care about it, so it's no problem. But if you really take it seriously, I think it is not compatible with the West. I'm very sorry to say.
I don't know if you know this. I'm this is actually the first time I mention it, because I've been forgetting, but I'm actually debating someone on September 11th in London. And the topic is Islam compatible with the West?
I'm very excited about this.
Yeah. I mean, it's just to me, though, the way I see it is, I look forward to hearing what he has to say, because if one religion, civilization teaches this and one teaches that, they're not compatible. I don't know. Maybe I'm a simple guy, but we'll see, right? Okay. At Lola, possible for Western Europe, e.g. United Kingdom and Ireland, to copy the Poland model. Poland has succeeded in maintaining its borders secure. Yeah. Poland and Hungary have, at least historically, been pretty good at the migrant question. So do you think Western Europe, for example, they mentioned United Kingdom and Ireland, do you think they could successfully copy that?
Well, I'm a bit sad that now we have to call secure borders the Poland model. I mean, there was a time when we just called this a state. I mean, this is the very sad thing, that we now have countries that we have to hold up as laudable
because
exceptions.
It's like a weird thing. They have borders.
Exactly. There's a country that secures its borders. How odd! What an outlier! What a strange thing. So
what a crazy notion.
I mean, hypothetically, yes. I mean,
Uh,
this idiotic claim that it's impossible for a country to control its borders because if you have a 40-foot wall, then somebody will come with a 50-foot ladder. I mean, this it's a fun meme. I don't. It probably fits nicely into a fortune cookie, but it is complete nonsense. It is like saying, oh, there is no point in locking the door behind you because
yeah.
somebody will come with a ram. I mean,
There's
yeah,
no point in having walls on my house.
yeah,
I
exactly.
should always leave the doors and windows completely open. What's the point,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, so this is of course you can secure borders. I mean, this again, the United States have shown it. What again, maybe the Trump administration is partially exaggerating it, but if you put the infrastructure and the manpower in place, of course you can do it. I mean, the same with the UK. The idea we cannot stop boats coming over the channel. What an absurdity! I always say jokingly, if the German army in 1940 would have said no, we don't want to invade you. We just want to migrate to the UK, they probably could have set over easily, and then they said, oh, there's nothing we can do to stop them. And the same with the Mediterranean. Given current technological things, drones, satellites, speedboats, what have you, to say we cannot control the Mediterranean, I'm sorry, this is just,
And let's
it's
be
nonsense.
brutally honest. I think countries have the right to, if you're invading and you're coming in, to shoot you. Peter Boghossian, I'm sure you know him. He and I, we had an interview, and he made that comment. I don't know if you know this, but the cameraman who was there,
Yes, I
literally,
saw it.
the woke cameraman, flipped out. How can you say that? But I mean, look, I have a law, I have sovereignty. Here's my borders. I made it very clear to you. Everyone understands. That's your side. That's my side. If you're going to break in, it's kind of like a home, right? It's in the United States. You break into my home, I can shoot you. Okay, it's your fault, not mine. So I do believe that if we're, and I'm not saying any European or any country even needs to resort to that, but even if it got to that point, I think that is a legitimate option. Which solidifies your point, which is, of course, it's silly to say that there's no way to stop this. There's all sorts of ways, including that, which I don't think is necessary.
Yeah, and again, as you said, I mean, this would be the most extreme option.
Yeah.
But then again, I mean, what as you saw in Ceuta, what is if things, the rumors are
Think
true?
about what we said, how many they are 70,000. They're, I
Yeah,
think, more than a population. So, what would the United States with its 350 whatever million do if 350 military age young men descended on it? You know?
and what if this happens again on August 15th? What if it's another
Yeah.
60,000? I mean, is this
Yeah.
then going to be this is like the sacking of Rome, every 100 years.
Yeah.
You just come in and they can't do anything. So the question is always what can be done and what is the political class not willing to do, right? And these are, of course, two completely
Mhm.
different pairs of shoes.
Well, they're not willing to do apparently anything. I gave the extreme, and I agree. This is not something I'm advocating for, but I'm trying to say that there's always something that could be done, including that. But they're not even willing to do the most modest kind of
Listen,
measures against it.
no, it's even worse. Just yesterday, the European Commission decided that they have to increase funding to Morocco to help prevent something like this happening again. So
So they're
basically,
being blackmailed, and they're paying the
yes,
blackmail,
and that's
which
the
is
thing.
which guarantees that this is going to keep happening.
And it guarantees keeps happening, and it shows that the biggest morons at the table at the moment is the leadership of the European Union. So this is, I can only say this again because I saw it a bit in the comments once again. I don't need the involvement of some nefarious Jew or something if the Europeans are just complete morons. I mean, as you said, you have a country that facilitates an invasion, and then the invaded are saying, "So how much shall we pay you?" I
You
mean,
know
it's
what's funny? What's amazing about this, and most people don't know this, but if we go back to the Barbary Wars, America's first war as a nation against Muslims, it was the same thing. They were being blackmailed, and it got to the point that the more they were blackmailed. So let me just explain what happened. Barbary Wars are Muslims from North Africa they were already attacking European vessels, but they started attacking American vessels and enslaving American sailors and torturing them, doing all sorts of things. And eventually, America started paying a tribute, jizya, okay, to make sure that they don't get attacked. But when they did that, the I think of Tripoli or Algiers, but one of the days or bays actually started becoming even more demanding. And at one point, for example, he had one American captain, that he had to carry all sorts of things, but including Muslims, to Constantinople, and he had to make sure that the ship faced east for prayers and all sorts of things. And then finally came to the point where they just said, oh yeah, we want like double what you were paying. And it was at that point that especially Thomas Jefferson said, okay, there's nothing left to it but war. So it's amazing. It's in the same area. It's the same dynamic, which is basically Morocco is now threatening Europe or Spain, more particularly, and for blackmail, and they're going to pay it. So if you pay it, that is a guarantee that they're going to continue doing this and expect more and more.
Precisely. So this is, once again, this is you could almost say this is just human nature. As you said, if I blackmail you and you pay it, then I'll continue to do it. As I said before, that need no, I don't need any kind of conspiracy or other third or fourth party actor. This is where there's if I push and there is mush, then they will keep pushing.
Yeah. Teresa Miller, hi, thank you for your work. I'm in the UK and find so many people can't hear the truth about Islam and other threats. I have little hope for the future of the West. Hope I'm wrong. Any response there, Ralph?
I don't think it's too late yet. I'm going to be completely honest, because for one reason, because I think more and more people are paying attention. I think luckily, some very powerful people, for all his other flaws, I think that Elon Musk has done a lot to draw attention to the issue. I think, as I said, I'm not agreeing with everything, but there's nobody with whom I agree on everything. But whether it was something we talked the first time on your podcast, whether it was the grooming gangs, whether it's the demographic issue, whether it's, I would say, the kind of rehabilitation of Tommy Robinson and others, I think he has played a very, very important role in this. So there is a movement of more and more people also politically. It was mentioned before, if you look at the polls in many countries, I think change is slowly but surely picking up pace. Now, as always, is it going to be in time? Is it going to happen quickly enough? That's the big question. But I think this is another thing. If we can change, as the term goes, the zeitgeist, right? If we stop backing down, right? If we find a backbone again, and I think many of the things that bother people, like seeing more and more women wailed in public. I mean, as somebody says, you see more people in a niqab in London than in Dubai. I think that's also start to reverse then, because as a culture, as a civilization finds its confidence again, it also forces others easier to assimilate. So I think there's that again. This is the positive, way of looking at this. But I want to remain positive. I always say this is an existential struggle. If we win, great, we won. But if we lose, I at least want to say that we tried. So this is giving up is not. This is my home, right? There is no plan B for me. There is no other place for me to go. So I have to be optimistic because otherwise, what would be the point?
Correct. Parlock, when whites become an abused minority, will the word racist still have weight? Good question. Well, one can argue that whites are becoming an abused minority, and one can argue the word still has some weight, but not necessarily. I mean, obviously, it's. I don't. Yeah, the word racist now. I remember where that's would terrify everyone, especially if you're white. But I don't know. I think do you think it's still do you think it still carries that taboo and fear in Europe, or are people just kind of like, whatever, yeah, okay, call me racist?
Yeah, no, I think the way you described it is completely accurate. This is not the conversation stopped by it once was.
Oh, okay. Well, that definitely is progress.
Yeah.
Lies destroy lives. They are not letting non-Muslims live and let live in Islamic countries. I think he's referring to what we were saying, which is, I don't mind Muslims doing if you're talking about Muslims and I was basically saying, I don't mind if Muslims practice Sharia on each other. But yeah, if you're a non-Muslim, if you're a Christian minority living under Islam, and that's why I always say what I'm concerned with is how they treat the other, right? The infidel, the kafir. So that definitely is room to talk about that.
it's not only just because I think it's not just in Islamic countries. I mean this would be, I don't want to open up a completely new can of worms. But have you followed this this debate, this Oxford Union debate? I think that
Everyone keeps telling me about it. I haven't looked at
Yeah.
it, so maybe I will. Yeah.
I just saw bits and pieces, and there was some podcast episodes about it. I still have to watch the whole thing. But towards the end, because Tommy Robinson was on the, let's be suspicious of Islam side, and there was this member of the, I think it was the Palestinian Muslim Student Association or something, and I'm sure that many of your viewers saw it, and she said to Tommy Robinson, she used his other name because his real name is Stephen Lennox, if I'm not mistaken, but she said, well, if it wouldn't be for the I think it was the Muslim Palestinian Student Association and the Southeast Asian Student Club or whatnot, like if they wouldn't protect him, then a raging mob outside would, and I'm quoting now, he would be literally cooked. So she was basically saying, she was basically making the argument of the anti-Islamic side. She was saying if it wouldn't be for us moderates in here, the less moderates outside, they would kill you. So you better be good to us, right? You better embrace Islam, because otherwise we cannot control our, more or let's say more motivated brethren.
Yeah.
And this is always my problem with the term moderate Islam, because I think there is, this argument was made by Mark Stein years ago when he said, well, it's the good cop, bad cop routine.
I was just going to say that.
The same goals. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. The good bad cop, which is, hey, you better work with me because otherwise the other guys are going to come and interrogate and beat you up. It's just amazing.
And it's also what Morocco did now to Spain, right?
Yeah.
There is a lot
either
of
do what we want or we're going to throw
yeah.
hordes at you,
Yeah.
right? Dejan, don't hold back in the debate, even if it gets you arrested for hate speech. I think they're talking to me, yeah? Also, if possible, please bring up the real reason why dogs are haram. Oh, I'm not going to hold back. That's not my style. I just, here's how I feel about this forthcoming debate. I told you the topic is Islam compatible with the West? As far as I'm concerned, the debate's over. Yeah, it's not. So to me, it's more of an interesting exercise, what we're going to see, because anyone in that audience who somehow at the end still thinks that, oh, no, I think Islam maybe is compatible, will be reflecting the real issue at hand, which is not that we don't know if it's compatible. It's that people have lost their mind and are irrational, and they can no longer differentiate and understand different categories. If someone honestly, after this debate, still doesn't get it, that will be the perfect reflection, in my opinion, of what is really the main malady of the West, which is that they just don't get it. You don't understand that, a square peg doesn't fit in a round hole. Yeah. You don't get that, right? I think that's going to be the ultimate lesson. Anyway, all right, Ralph. It's wow, we've almost hit 2 hours. I'm very impressed. Thanks for joining me and giving me.
This was great.
As usual, your great insights. We'll do it again, hopefully next week. I'm sure there'll be
please.
more.
No, I love this. This is such a beautiful back and forth, and I hope if the audience enjoys it, I'm happy to join you anytime.
Do. Yeah, you're a fan favorite. All right.
All right. So that's great to hear. I love your fans just as much. This is a great group, and I'm glad we found each other.
Yeah. We definitely did. So. And unfortunately, the topics that you and I can discuss will never end, and will always be developing, and there will always be new angles, no matter what. So until next time, I'll talk to you later.
Farewell, Raymond. Take care. Bye, everybody.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Okay. So there it was, Ralph Schoellhammer. Check him out. Go find him on, Twitter, X, or whatever, Facebook. Good guy, good insights. And that's it. So that's all we got for Ceuta. Until next time, because apparently this is a nonstop developing thing, and I see it as a harbinger of things to come, honestly, which is why I'm very interested in following it, and will continue following it. But at any rate, thank you again for joining me, and take care. I'll see you later. Bye.